Rachel Winchester, WordPress as a Paintbrush, Introduction to Internet Art. Just as a reminder, please make sure your phones are on silent or completely off, which would be better. The session's about 30, 40 minutes or so, and if you have questions, we'll take them at the end. And then if you have more questions for Rachel, you can find her outside in the Happiness Lounge, just right out here, or throughout the event. Just a reminder also, we're having after party. There are signs on the doors. Please take a picture so you don't forget. Another reminder is that if you do take photos of anything, please email them to us. We have signs outside for the emails. And without further ado, pass it off to Rachel.
Thank you. Well, welcome to WordCamp Montclair, and thanks for coming to my presentation, WordPress as a Paintbrush, an introduction to internet art. My name is Rachel Winchester. You can just call me Win for short. Everyone calls me Win. And I am also a product designer for Digital Cube. So in this presentation, I'll give a brief introduction to what internet art is and why I think you should look into it and engage with it. And a lot of the research that I put into this presentation and a lot of the points that I'm going to come to are a product of just my background and my perspective. So just 5 years ago, I graduated with a bachelor's of art in art history. And then from then, I've worked at quite a few art museums and other arts institutions while managing WordPress websites as a hobby. And then I turned my hobby into my job. I took a UX design boot camp a few years ago, and now I work as a UX product designer at Digital Cube. It's just a brief background of me. So first I'll start with net art, with a capital N, and I'll set the stage for what those artists were doing back then, and then I'll move into what has happened since then and how WordPress has emerged in the scene. And then I'll talk about the future and what we should do with this knowledge now. So let's go back to the early 90s. Just think about what you were doing in the early 90s. How many people here actually remember the early 90s? Okay. I was not born yet, so I had to do some research and gather some images. So this is, I think, some images that can kind of capture the zeitgeist of the early 90s. Hopefully, but if you guys remember, just think back to then. And if you were using the computer, you might have been using a device that looked like this. The Apple Macintosh 2 looked like the most popular home PC desktop computer. It definitely revolutionized desktop work, so it was seen in the office, and it was also in people's homes. Before then, computers were too big for that kind of use. So it was the Apple Macintosh 2 kind of in the early 90s that people were using at home. But the history of computers is different than the history of the internet. So the World Wide Web, people were really starting to get online in the early 90s. So 1991 was the first internet service provider. It was called World, because it connected the world. By 1992, about a million people were online. That's not really a big number. 1 million is smaller than the city of Philadelphia. And then by 1994, HTML was released to the public. So we finally have, the public finally has a tool to create websites and put something online around 1994. All right. Oh, where did the text go? That is very interesting. I don't know where the text went. I'll just improvise. So so internet art is a contemporary art form that's international, and it's also conceptual, interactive, and digital. It's conceptual in the way that it is about the idea of the work, not necessarily about what you're looking at. And it's digital because the internet relies on digital technologies, screens and computers. So internet art is kind of a subset of digital art. And then it's also interactive because a lot of these works are websites that you have to go through with your computer, with a mouse, with your keyboard. So you have to kind of interact with them to experience them. Very sorry that the text didn't show up. And this was a formal art movement that artists were consciously engaging in between the mid-90s to the mid-2010s. So these artists were communicating with each other, talking about the work that they were making, and talking about a definition of internet art and net art to settle on. So the best way to really get a feel of what internet art is to just go through some examples. So I've chosen some early examples from the mid-90s, and these examples they're frequently cited in blog posts and in lectures, but don't think that these are necessarily like the most important artworks or the most popular. They're just ones that I found in my research. So I'll start with Jody. Jody is an arts duo, Joan Heemskirk and Dirk Paesmans, and they together do poetry, conceptual poetry using the internet. So they play around with the visual element of poetry as well as sometimes the language, but definitely the code. So I'm going to go to www.jody.org. So this website is both their first artwork, internet artwork, but also their personal website. So when you go to the page, you're presented with this kind of cover screen, which is a big link. So you click on the link, and you're brought to some very interesting looking stuff. Very lo-fi. It definitely has that feel of the early internet aesthetic. But all of these are also links to poems, essentially, code poetry. And each one is like its own artwork or exploration into abstract code poetry. So you can just kind of click around and see how the images change and just take in the visuals. Who here likes abstract art? Cool. So Jody innovated on the genre of poetry by applying that to code and to the visual element of this website. And one of the motivations behind what they do is explained in this quote. When you work with computers, you have sound and you have image, but in the computer you also have code, and we tried to play with that a lot. So a lot of their artworks come out of just experimentation and playfulness. Next is Olea Lealina, with My Boyfriend Came Back from the War. This was made in 1996, and it's been described as a net film or a net theater. And she was definitely a pioneer in the internet art movement. She was one of the organizers to get all of these artists on a mailing list and communicate with each other and really talk about what they're doing. So we're going to go to My Boyfriend Came Back to the War. It starts with this link in the top right corner. I'm not sure if you can read it too well. My boyfriend came back from the war. After dinner, they left us alone. And it's this sentence, this kind of abstract sentence that sets up the play or the film that is now going to happen in the browser. So you'll see these GIF images that you can click on. There it is. And as you click through, the story unfolds. The screen you're looking at in the browser is an interpretation of a stage, and they're actually built with iframes, so you could even move them like this. But you click through sections of the stage to go through that section's story, and each section has different imagery and text. So depending on where you click and what you click on, the story progresses in a very different way. So each person can have their own experience going through this film or this play based on what you want to click on and when. So I invite you to explore that more on your own afterwards. It's a very interesting piece. All right. So what's really interesting about that piece that you just saw is that she kind of was really trying to make a film. I was not very fond of this format back then. I would have preferred it to be a video, but animated GIF was the only way to get a moving image in the browser. So that work was a result of trying to do film with the internet. And the last example I'll show you from the original net artist is Gramatron by Mark America. So this was an ongoing project and still is an ongoing project, but the first iteration started in 1993 and was released in 1997. Mark America is a novelist, so he used the internet and HTML specifically to kind of innovate on on literature and the format of the novel. So I'll show you this now. This piece was also selected for the Whitney Biennial, which is a very prestigious award. And I'm going to go through the lower bandwidth version of Gramatron here. It's called Abe Golem. I'm going to go through the lower bandwidth version because that was made before the high bandwidth version. So we're not going to go through all the text because it is a novel, but I'm just going to explain how this novel is working. So traditionally, when you read a book, you got a beginning, a middle, and an end. But as you see, this paragraph that you start with has different things for you to click on, and depending on where you click, the story goes in a different direction. So with a format like that, you can't really have an end. And that's what he loved about this new form of writing a novel. It's called hypertext literature. And it does have that feel of a create your own storybook. However, those storybooks have an end. This piece has over 400 pages total, and some of the links are interlinking. So there's so many different paths you can take to go through this book. And different experiences you can have based on what you click on. So the story of the story of Gramatron, I should actually explain what the story is about. So because the story doesn't have an end, he also paired this with a narrative that wouldn't have an end. So the story is about Abe Golem, a character who is a writer, and he's, back in 1997 when this is being published, he is looking towards the future of what he called the electrosphere and the new internet that is it's essentially like the metaverse, but back then. So it's the metaverse before it was called the metaverse. So Abe Golem, this writer, is trying to imagine how he as a writer can live in the future with the internet. But considering the internet is always changing, it goes along with the story with the ongoing project. So every time new stuff comes out and new innovations come with the internet, Mark America iterates on this project. So this story has so many different versions, and he's actually still working on it today. What's kind of scary is the possibility of never reaching production closure because of the advent of all these new software applications. So this never-ending story goes along with the fact that software is constantly improving, constantly updating, and the internet is constantly changing. So he has to keep updating the story. So just imagine, all of this happened even before the New York Times got online. So these artists were really some of the first to get online and do a lot of stuff with the internet, with code. By 1997, they've finally settled on a definition and a term for what they were doing, and they used net art, the short term net art with a capital N, or internet with art with a capital I. And this arts duo, MTAA is another arts duo, they came up with this diagram to kind of explain exactly what's going on. So it's not just the computers, it's not just the communication between people, but the way that computers connect people, and it's the internet. And by the late 90s, I'm finally here. I'm finally on this earth, and I can finally see and experience all of this amazing art. So now we're on to part 2. So all of that stuff happened before WordPress was even online. So it was even created. So what happened from then until now? I showed you that back in 1992, there were about 1 million websites online, or about million people online. Since then, the acceleration of what people online and websites online has increased so fast. Yahoo, Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, the different types of websites that are emerging on the internet are allowing more people to get online and participate online. And then WordPress started in 2003, was a major player in this as well. WordPress, as we all know, it's an open source platform, a content management system that handles the theme, plugins, media, database, and the core of WordPress. So it's a tool that can come in between you as a website creator and the website itself. So you don't necessarily need to be a developer to make a website anymore now that WordPress and similar tools are on the scene. So WordPress makes it easier to build websites, easier to build companies, and easier to publish content online, and easier to connect to people. So if it's easier to do all of these things, it's also easier to make some internet art as well. This history goes along with the history of Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3, which I know are some really hot terms right now. So the original net artists that I shared were working in Web 1 when very few people knew about the internet and had access to it. And there was very few user-generated content getting online. Web 2 is when WordPress emerges on the scene, as well as social media and a lot of other sites that increase the amount of user-generated content online. And also by then, the number of websites increased and the number of users increased as well. And now we're in Web 3, where the amount of user-generated content is even more, users even more, and more websites. So what this all means is also that since most people are online, we all understand the internet a lot more. We kind of understand internet culture too. And especially after COVID, after a lot of the digital transformation happened during COVID, and we all were forced to use the internet a lot more, that definitely accelerated Web 3. So the internet is ubiquitous at this point. And WordPress has played a huge part in that. This graphic was shared at State of the Word last year in December, showing 43% of the internet is WordPress now, which is insane. All of the other CMS tools have a much smaller market cap. So when I say WordPress is a paintbrush, it's because most people can now use WordPress, and most people have been using WordPress to make websites, but now you can also make art. So you just need to understand what internet art is. So, but what has happened to internet art since then, since the original net artists from the 90s and early 2010s? Well, a lot has changed going along with the Web 1, 2, 3 definitions. A lot has changed about the internet, a lot has changed about the world and the culture, the internet culture. And the artists themselves were making different work that was a little bit different than what they had been making earlier. So in other words, around 2005-ish, those formal internet artists stopped using the capital I and started using the lowercase I. This is not unlike a lot of other art movements in the past. So for example, minimalism used to be a capital M. The minimalist artists of the 60s and 70s, they were making minimalist work in a very conscious way. They were communicating with each other, trying to come up with a definition of minimalism together. So it was a very formal movement. But afterwards, the idea of minimalism kind of resonated through society and culture. So now I think almost everyone here can kind of understand what minimalism is and see something and say, oh, that's minimalist, whether or not you actually know of the original capital M minimalist artists. So that's kind of what has happened between the early 90s and now. So now I'm just going to show you some of the newer internet artists who are using the lowercase I and how they're working differently because the times have changed and the tech has changed. So Raphael Rosendahl is, he started working in 2000, so I guess before it went to a lowercase I. But he's still working now, and I like some of the pieces he makes because they're just very short and playful, not as involved as like a Gramatron book. So I'll invite you to explore some of his works on your own. He has a lot on his website. Next, I'll show you Ani and Susie. Ani and Susie, they're a duo. They make very hilarious platform art, is what I'd call. They will take a popular platform that we all use and change the content. And when you change the content, there's a very different effect takes place. So here, they've used the Amazon interface, e-commerce interface, and mashed that with a dating app. So it's a very involved work too. It took them, I think, over a year to put this all together, and they got their friends and other people around to contribute to this project. So that's really cool. Definitely invite you to explore that more on your own. And then last is Shawnee, Michael and Holloway. I really like her stuff. It's definitely highbrow. She's a professor herself at the Art Institute of Chicago, but she comments on race, gender, and sexuality in her work, and also critiques power structures online. So I'll invite you to explore some of her work on your own too. I'm actually not going to click through too much just because, well, it was rated triple X by an all-feminist jury. So some of her stuff can be a little, I don't know the age group of everyone in here is what I'm saying. So what I do invite you to explore some of her stuff on your own. And next slide, there we go. All right, so that's what happened back in the 90s and until now. But now that we know about these original net artists and now that we've seen some of their work and why they were doing that work, what do we do now? What do we do with this knowledge? So to me, that's like asking what's the function of net art and the function of art history. So the function of history is to learn about the past and learn about how people lived in the past, solved problems in the past, and worked in the past, so that we can understand how that feeds into the present. And then art's function is to, well, it has a lot of different functions, but artists, they work with the medium to express themselves and tell a story. So you can learn from them by the way that they're working with the medium and how different mediums evolve over time to change how they express themselves and tell stories over time. So with the time changing so much, with this being Web3 and time changing so much, and I guess time's moving faster than it has ever been, especially with the internet, because we're communicating so much easier. We really feel like we're in a new era. Like everyone's talking about different revolutions. So I feel like it's appropriate to look back to the beginning of the internet to see what those artists were doing with that new era, because when the internet came on the scene, they knew that they were in a new era. So I invite you to just take inspiration from the original artists to play with the internet and understand and just kind of express yourself. So I mentioned before that a lot of the kind of conclusions that I came to are kind of because I went from an art person to a product designer in a short span. So the picture to your left is before senior year when I was an intern at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And the picture to your right was just a couple months ago, where I'm now working as a product designer at Digital Cube. I see a lot of similarities between art and products. Um, it's really just a change of your goal and your intention. You're working with the same medium, but you have a different goal or intention. So art, we make art for a lot of reasons, but generally we put it out in the world for appreciation. If we display art, we hope someone will see it and appreciate it on some level. They like it, they love it. I don't know, it makes them think, opens their mind. They'll appreciate it on some level. Or even if you are an artist and you put out and you make work, but not for the public, maybe just for yourself to appreciate. That's great too. Whereas with products, we make products for the purpose of business. So we're at a WordCamp conference. I'm sure a lot of you here work for WordPress companies. Maybe you're a WordPress entrepreneur or freelancer. So we're definitely more in tune with the product end of business and how WordPress can be used to create products for the purpose of business. So when I think of how you can make internet art, all you have to do is change your intention and your goal. So instead of contributing to your business or your freelance practice or your company, just put something out there that you can appreciate or someone else may appreciate. And that's it. And just have fun with it and experiment and express yourself. I think this is very important right now because, again, the internet is everywhere, it's everything, it's ubiquitous, and it's only gonna become like more important in the future. So for us to feel included in history and included in culture, we should engage in culture online. So I really encourage you to, play around with WordPress in less business-oriented ways and see if you can try and make some internet art. I found this quote from Olea Lealina that definitely supports what I just said. Only when users start to express themselves through these technical innovations do they truly become relevant to culture at large. So again, if culture is the internet, internet art will be very relevant. All right, so, but what do we actually do with this knowledge? What's some more like concrete, some tangible examples of what we can do once we learn about the net artists? So I'll just show you what we're doing at Digital Cube. So I work as a product designer at Digital Cube. We make products for people who choose WordPress, including Shifter. So Shifter is a sponsor of this event. We're at that table kind of just behind you. And we're a small small company based in Japan. We're growing a team in Philly, and we're all about innovation. So when I joined this company and I learned that we're all about innovation, I just knew that internet art was going to be a good fit. So these are some things that we're doing with internet art at Digital Cube. So first we created an annotated bibliography. Over December, January, I found a few interns from Swarthmore College, and I got them to do some research with us and find some sources to tell us more about this genre, this art form. And we used that information to start developing a residency program. So we are starting an arts residency program at Digital Cube, where any kind of artist, whether you're an internet artist or not, where any kind of artist can propose an internet project for us to execute collaboratively. So you could propose the project, come into DC, work on the project with us, and have like a cultural exchange where you learn from us, we'll learn from you, and then we'll create this work that will live on our platforms and hopefully start an internet art gallery. And then lastly, we're also experimenting ourselves in some ways just to see what happens. So I tried an experiment with Gramatron. So I recreated Gramatron and kind of updated it for 2022 using tools that I have today, no code tools that I have today. So the CMS is WordPress. The front end is Elementor, but the content is artificial intelligence. I am not a novelist, definitely not used to writing hypertext literature. So I leaned on OpenAI to generate some text for me rather than write that myself. So I'll show you the demo that I recreated with Gramatron, how I remixed Gramatron. I told the AI to write about a character named Abe Golem, who is a novelist. And this is the first prompt it spat out. And then I would take some aspects of the sentence and say, oh, tell me more about this and tell me more about that, to link the sections together. So this is the first sentence that the AI spat out. Abe Golem is a writer living in the metaverse, where he spends his days exploring the endless possibilities of digital worlds. For Abe, the metaverse is a playground where anything and everything is possible, and he often finds himself lost in its endless possibilities. So it's pretty good to start, I think. I think it's kind of interesting. However, I feel like the story gets less and less interesting, and the AI starts to, in some ways, repeat itself. It keeps saying like hope and possibility. There's so many possibilities, endless possibilities, exploring endless possibilities. So it's not as interesting as a book that a human would write, but it definitely made it easier for me to write this book because I don't write like that. It is full of endless possibilities. Yeah. And what I learned from this experiment is that it's still hard. Even with AI helping me out, it's still very hard to write a nice, like a enjoyable hypertext literature novel. It gets boring fast. All right. So I just want to end with this quote by Mark America. My focus is and has always been to look at the role that techne or technicity plays to really investigate the prosthesis I am. So what he's talking about, like when you think of prosthesis or prosthetic, you think of maybe an arm or a leg or something that you can, some body part that replaces something maybe you lost or some kind of extension to your own body. But here, he's so interested in the new technology of the internet that he uses the internet to extend his mind. It's like a prosthetic for his mind. So he uses the internet to kind of as an extension of his own creativity, to continually innovate on the genre of literature. So what now? I think I've mentioned this a few times, but go forth and make art. Go experiment, go see what you learn and what can happen, and maybe those new, this new understanding and the new lessons that you learn you can bring into the rest of your life, maybe into your business. Just go forth and make art. A renaissance is upon us, and its name is WordPress. Right. Thank you. Thank you for attending my talk. I shared my presentation. Is the presentation, like the slides, linked anywhere?
So obviously all the videos will go up on the WordCamp national site in a couple of weeks probably. But you could obviously talk to Wynn after, and she can send you any slides you'd like. We have time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, that will be the time.
I'll share the slideshow on my Twitter and my website as well, so you can rediscover all this stuff. Any questions? Yes.
I'm just curious if anyone has ever done this. I know from my own reading as well as someone I knew was involved in college radio who explained to a particular artist whose music was proven to be, even if it's very dissonant, to be proven mathematically correct. And I'm wondering if anyone has ever tried to turn music into math that could be vectorized to produce a random or an abstract image that would express what the music is actually playing.
I don't know examples of that, but I definitely feel like someone has done that before. Musicians trying doing stuff with the internet with their music. What you were explaining kind of sounds like almost like synesthesia, you know, where you hear something and you see some people who have this condition, they see things when they hear something. So it's almost like projecting that image on the screen. So it sounds like it would be a really cool project, but I don't actually know of something like that that
Are
exists.
you aware of any tools that would help in that translation at all?
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yes, in the back.
Yes, so the marketplace for art on the internet. Now, NFTs, do you think that really had a major impact? Because before the internet, I'm old enough, I'm in my 40s, it really wasn't a big marketplace for internet art. But then with the emergence of NFTs, you know, you start seeing now, you know, art can be marketable like music. So is that a factor now of getting more and more developers and companies involved in the production of internet art is for the monetization of NFTs?
Well, I'm not an expert on NFTs. I do think, that's a good question. So if you were to, I guess, tokenize a website, so like how if an NFT, how would Mark America, for example, turn Gramatron into an NFT to kind of protect that? Maybe you can download the site as a file and re-upload it to an NFT platform so that it gets onto the blockchain. So I guess, yeah, for if the artwork is a full website like this, you'd have to save it as a file and then re-upload it to the blockchain to get it as an NFT. And then from that point, I guess you could sell it. So yeah, maybe that's, again, I'm not an expert on NFTs, but maybe that's an innovation there. Another interesting thing about trying to sell internet art, Raphael Rosendahl was actually one of the first, or if not the first, to sell a website as an artwork. And what he would do actually is just transfer the domain name to the buyer. So the buyer would own the domain, and that's how they would own the work. So yeah, Raphael actually is getting into NFTs because I see this thing here, but I haven't explored his NFTs yet.
Yeah, because I'm really believing that it's going to become like Apple Play Store, where you can buy NFT artwork. Eventually, that's where it's going to lead to. Right now, it's kind of like a small marketplace, but I can see it expanding, and a company kind of monopolized the marketplace for artwork. You know,
Yes.
like a couple companies, maybe like 3 big companies.
Yeah.
You know, and so I can really see the future of internet art really expanding.
Yeah, I do think NFTs are gonna revolutionize digital art, maybe internet art, as long as you can get past all this speculation and all the weird stuff that has happened with NFTs. There is still value there, I think. Any other questions? I'll also be available for questions at the Happiness Bar.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Oh wait, one more question.
I have a simple question.
Uh-huh.
Can you recommend some resources if I want to learn more about the internet art?
Yeah, my favorite one is the Net Arts Anthology. It's actually by Rhizome, which is a part of the New Museum. So the New Museum in Manhattan, all about contemporary art. They have this project and they've maintained this project. It's really a preservation project because a lot of the work from the early net art hasn't been preserved. So they're like recreating or rediscovering or just tracking down where some of this stuff is. But it gives you a good background on the history of it. It gives you a lot of links, like a lot of links to more artworks. Some of them are completely online, some of them are part online, part in person. But you can spend days, weeks just going through all this stuff. It's a huge database.
Okay, thank you. So guys, we have a little bit of time before lunch, so just don't crowd the table until lunch is ready. They'll call everyone over. There will be 2 lines going that way. Also, as a reminder, if you pay for parking, you can get a free voucher at the desk. So make sure you do that. Okay?
What is the happiness that people
It's just a call for the speaker.